Hey, you guys, welcome to Truth Set Free. It's November 1st, 2023. I'm Matt Lewis. This is Pastor Steve Whinery coming to you live, Calvary Chapel, Tri-Cities. If you guys have questions for Pastor Steve, send them to me, please. crosswalkradio@gmail.com. You guys can text 707-872-7677. If you are watching live with us, just post in the comments, Facebook, YouTube, and do our best to get to your questions. If you have prayer requests, you guys can have Pastor Steve pray for you in there. Do all the things, like, subscribe, share, just trying to get this out as much as they allow us with their algorithms and the content that we produce here. But nonetheless, we'd appreciate that. It's cool to see where you guys are watching from around the world at all times. And yay for that. I don't have too many announcements. We just had the harvest party. There is a lot of stuff going down for the holidays coming up. So actually, we could talk about what we're doing for Christmas. Are we ready to announce that? So
actually on Christmas, actually the Sunday before Christmas this year is Christmas Eve. And so we're going to do one big family service up at the track. And so same place where we do the father-daughter ball. That's where we're going to be meeting on Sunday morning. And then we're going to do one Christmas Eve service at night here down at the amphitheater.
Yeah, so that's the Hapo Community Center in Pasco. Not going to have childcare and all that stuff, but obviously bring your whole family, kids and everything, but 1:10 a.m. service for that. So, and then if you've never been to our Christmas Eve service, probably one of my favorites of the year. It's an evening service. It's our outdoor amphitheater, so pro tip, bring your jackets and, depending on the weather. But it's a candlelight service, and it's just a special time. It's one of my favorites. So if you've never been, they have big bonfires. Get to sing Christmas songs and be in the Word on Christmas Eve. And then that's on a Sunday this year, which makes it even kind of more special.
My family brings sleeping bags.
Yeah.
Covers up with sleeping bags.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
We do have heaters we try to put out at the top, but unless you're sitting right next to them, you're going to be cold. So bring your sleeping bag per Steve's advice. Okay. That's all I have for you. And actually, one more thing. You guys that are local, Steve started a study on Israel. And this will be session 2 of the Israel study. So you guys are welcome to join us at 6:30 tonight, Wednesday night. And if not, you can check those out online. They'll be posted as he goes through that topical. Okay. Good to go?
Yep.
First one for today says this. Why did John the Baptist ask if Jesus was the one later when before he was right there when, and he's quoting a verse, suddenly a voice came from heaven saying, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased," and it's Matthew 3:17. Is he just plain old second-guessing him, or what's going on there? And then the second part is about, actually, I'll let you answer that, and I'll get into a second part because it's kind of a different question.
Some of this is going to be inference, but you see it in the context. I'm getting this out of Matthew chapter 11. It says in verse 2, "And when John had heard in prison about the works of Christ, he sent 2 of his disciples and said to him, 'Are you the coming one, or do we look for another?' And Jesus answered and said to them, 'Go and tell John the things which you hear and see. The blind see, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear, the dead are raised up, and the poor have the gospel preached to them. And blessed is he who is not offended because of me.'" One of the things that's happening here is John is in prison, and he's in prison for basically calling Herod out in having an illicit relationship with his brother's wife. And so John has a good idea that he's never getting out of prison, that he's going to die there. And that's exactly what takes place in that situation. What John had been expecting is the same thing that the apostles expected, that Jesus would come, and because he was the Messiah, that he would lead the Jewish nation into the kingdom age. And so the kingdom age has to do with Israel being top nation on the planet, Israel getting their full inheritance, the rule of God through the Messiah literally on the earth, that kind of stuff. And John wasn't seeing that. What John was seeing was some of the same things that the apostles were seeing, that Jesus was doing different things than what they thought he was going to do. And so John is second guessing himself at this point. He was sure that Jesus was the Messiah when he saw the Holy Spirit coming down on him in the form of a dove, as the Father had told him. But now he's in a situation where it looks like he's going to die and he's not going to see the kingdom come, and it's not going the way that he thinks it should go. And so Jesus, in answering him, refers to Old Testament passages. And what he's referring to are kingdom passages where you see the blind see and the lame walk and the deaf hear and so on. And so there are various passages, Isaiah 29, 18, 19, Isaiah chapter 35, 4 through 6, that you can go to and you can see references there. And so Jesus is reassuring John that, yes, he is the guy. One
of the encouraging things about that for me was that, Jesus said there's no greater than John the Baptist, obviously up until that time. He is introducing through the ministry of repentance who the Messiah is. They read the verse of this spiritual miracle happening in front of him. And yet, as a man, he still begins to doubt because he doesn't have the whole picture of eschatology like we have.
Yeah.
And that's encouraging for a frail man like myself.
Yeah, exactly. Even John the Baptist is wondering if he was right, if he had it squared away. So.
All right, second part to that question talks about Elijah. It says, did the Jewish people at that time consider Elijah to be some greater prophet than the rest? Because Jesus speaks of him like, and he quotes, spirit and power of Elijah. Mm-hmm. Why not Elisha, who did more miracles? Why not the spirit and power of Moses? Why Elijah? There's this whole thing with John saying he's not Elijah, and Jesus saying, if you can accept it, he is Elijah. I'm leaning towards he's not actually Elijah, and but still curious if you could go deeper into what that's all about.
Yeah, the reason Elijah is such a big deal is because of the last words of the Old Testament. And so in Malachi chapter 4, it says, remember the law of Moses, my servant, which I commanded him in Horeb for all Israel with the statutes and judgments. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. And he will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the hearts of the children to their fathers, lest I come and strike the earth with a curse. And so Elijah is prophesied as coming before the great and dreadful day of the Lord, which includes the coming of Christ. You also have passages that talk about the messenger that comes before Jesus. In this same passage, in John chapter 11, Matthew chapter 11, it goes on, and Jesus is talking about John, and he says in verse 9, what did you go out to see, a prophet? Yes, I say to you, and more than a prophet. For this is he of whom it is written, behold, I send my messenger before your face, who will prepare your way before you. And again, he's quoting from Malachi there, except for now he's quoting chapter 3, verse 1. Assuredly, I say to you, among those born of women, there is not risen one greater than John the Baptist, but he who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. And from the days of John, I'm going to... I'll go through and read it. And from the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven suffers or allows violence, and the violent take it by force. For all the prophets and the law prophesied until John, and if you are willing to receive it, he is Elijah who is to come. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. And what Jesus is talking about is a real offer of the coming of the kingdom. John the Baptist was expecting the kingdom to come. The apostles were expecting the kingdom to come at that point. Excuse me. And if Israel had received Jesus as Messiah, and talking about Israel as a whole, Israel would have gone into the kingdom. The problem was that they didn't do that. And so when Jesus is talking about John being Elijah, he says to these people, if you're willing to receive it, and the question is, were they willing to receive it? And the answer is no. Obviously, what ended up happening is the Jewish nation rejected Jesus as Messiah as a whole and ended up crucifying him. And it says, if you are willing to receive it, he is, talking about John, he is Elijah. And then he says, who is to come? And so it's like there's this whole waffling thing that's going on in that passage. So if you're willing to receive it, he is Elijah. And then Jesus lets us know that actually Elijah is going to be coming. And so, again, that has to do with the offer of the kingdom. When you look at Jesus' ministry, at the beginning of Jesus' ministry and all through John's ministry, they're talking about the coming of the kingdom and the fact that Israel needs to repent, and that the Old Testament fulfillment of the kingdom will take place. And Jesus talks about it coming shortly. But when you get towards the end of Jesus' ministry, he starts changing the time scale. And he starts talking about him in different parables. He talks about him coming and going away on a long journey, and going away for a long period of time and then coming back, and that kind of thing. That's towards the end of his ministry. And it's because you see the rejection of Jesus becoming a more for lack of a better term, popular situation in the nation of Israel. And so now we're going to what the Bible actually prophesies in the fact that Messiah was going to come. And the first time he was going to come as a suffering servant. And the second time he's going to come as the Messiah who delivers the people of Israel. In Matthew chapter 17, Jesus is coming down from the Mount of the Transfiguration, and on the Mount, they end up seeing Moses and Elijah, and they're talking with Jesus about the things that are going to be accomplished in Jerusalem, talking about the coming of his death. And his disciples ask him in John 17:10, "Why then do the scribes say that Elijah must come first?" Jesus answered and said to them, "Indeed, Elijah is coming first and will restore all things. But I say to you that Elijah has come already, and they did not know him, but did to him whatever they wished. Likewise, the Son of Man is also about to suffer at their hands." And so again, you see this kind of dichotomy in the way that Jesus is treating the whole Elijah thing. And he flat out says Elijah is coming first, just like the Old Testament says, and just like he had said previously in Matthew chapter 11, but then he refers to John the Baptist again. And so the only thing that I can divine from that whole situation is that God was actually offering Israel an actual ability, or an actual promise that they would go into the kingdom, as the Old Testament said, if they would receive him as Messiah. And so John was a real offer of Elijah. And so he came in the spirit and power of Elijah. He knew that he wasn't Elijah in the sense that he wasn't the fulfillment of this. God also knew that he wasn't Elijah. Jesus knew that he wasn't Elijah. But the offer still stands. And the fact that it wasn't going to come to pass doesn't have anything to do with whether or not the offer was real. And so there was a real offer for Israel to go into the kingdom immediately if they had received Jesus as Messiah, and God would have considered John the Baptist to be Elijah. But again, you have the situation where God knows the end from the beginning, and so he knows that's not going to happen. So real offer, real rejection, their free will was used. Real offer, real rejection, and so therefore the scripture is going to be fulfilled as the Old Testament said, and Elijah is going to come before the great and dreadful day of the Lord, and that's the Lord coming back in judgment to judge the earth. And that's pictured in Revelation chapter 19.
What I like about that exchange there is that, the whole election versus free will versus God choosing us and us choosing him, is it a real choice? When you break that down, that gives you a little nugget into how it is for the rest of those passages, because just because God knows they're not going to choose him, it doesn't mean it's not a real choice.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean they forced him to do it.
Yeah.
He just knows that they're not going to choose him.
Right.
But it still allows me to choose him, even though he chose me.
Right.
And it all flows together. Okay.
Here's another thing with this.
Yeah.
The offer didn't end with the death of Jesus. The offer is reiterated when you get to the book of Acts. And so Peter, when he's talking about the restoration of all things, when he's offering it's in Acts chapter 4, when he's offering the Jewish nation, talking about Jesus and receiving him let's see. Repent therefore and be converted, so that your sins may be blotted out, so that times of refreshing may come from the presence of the Lord, and that he may send Jesus Christ, who was preached to you before, whom heaven must receive until the times of restoration of all things, which God has spoken by the mouth of all his holy prophets since the world began. That's an offer of the kingdom.
I forgot about that.
Yeah. And so, and again, in the book of Acts, the Jewish nation rejects Jesus as Messiah.
Right.
Even up to that point. So,
all right. In that exchange where he says Elijah will come, could it be that he is coming before the second coming? Could it be taken as part of the book of Revelation timing?
Oh yeah, yeah.
And not just in that
right
rejection.
So in Malachi's passage, it talks about him coming before the great and dreadful day of the Lord, and that would be a reference to the second coming of Christ. And one of the things it says is that he's going to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the hearts of the children to their fathers. There's going to be a restoration of right relationships in the nation of Israel. That indicates that he's going to be there for a period of time working on the people of Israel.
Right.
And so one of the two witnesses is almost for sure Elijah.
Otherwise you got a lot of problem passages.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome.
Yep.
A lot of stuff going on there. Okay. My next question comes from Kelly. Kelly asks, very simply, can you explain 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 10? I have it pulled up here. I'll go ahead and read the verse, and then maybe you want to go read before or after. But this is what it says. For this reason, the woman ought to have a symbol of authority on her head because of the angels. And I was talking about head coverings, a lot of cultural stuff going on here. Mm-hmm. As Paul's writing to the Corinthians. So what do you do with that verse? I'm curious because I can't remember what you've done.
Right, so I can't explain it. I have no idea.
Okay, I thought you might say that. I just thought maybe you had something deeper, but in the commentaries I went through, it was all over the place.
Yeah, it is all over the place. So there's a couple of things that we can be thinking about. Number one, the symbol of authority on her head is not how it actually reads. It says, for this reason, the woman ought to have authority on her head because of the angels. And so in the passage, it's talking about veiling. It's not talking about little doilies on your head. It's talking about veiling, and this was something that was common to the Jewish culture at this time. It had also been common to the Greek culture, which is where this is at, and even the Roman culture. They were in a period of time where people were starting to flout that whole thing, and so the idea of a veil carried kind of the same idea as a wedding ring. And so if you see a woman with a wedding ring, she's not available. And if you see a woman without a wedding ring, she is available. And so it kind of carried that connotation. And there were still places all over the Roman Empire where women, when they went out in public, they went out veiled. And the veil could be anything from basically a scarf that was over her head, but generally speaking, when you read the references at the time, the veil was something that went down over the top of the head and all the way down to the neck. And so sometimes it had to do with their robes, and so they would take part of the robes. The Greeks specifically would take part of their robes and they would bring it up over the top of their heads, talking about the ladies. And sometimes they would take that and wrap it around their face also. And so we have depictions of this.
Now, this is similar to the Middle East culture today type of thing, right?
Yeah, it is. And so when you're going through this passage and you're looking at what Paul has to say about this passage, it has to do with glorifying your head. And so at the beginning it says, verse 3, I want you to know that the head of every man is Christ, the head of woman is man, and the head of Christ is God. And so it's talking about headship here. It's talking about authority in these passages. And it says, every man praying or prophesying having his head covered dishonors his head. And that could be talking about the Lord, or that can be talking about his own head, and it depends on where you go at it with this with the interpretive process, because the word head is just head in the passage. And so in this instance, head is pretty much just like it is in English. So your head could be talking about your head. It could be talking about the person who is over you. And pretty much all the way through here, you have this back and forth type of situation with it going between the actual head and the person over you. And so a man was to glorify Christ in his worship in the church. And so he was not to have his head covered, because man is made in the image of God. And it's one of the things that Paul says in this passage. He says, every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head, for that is one and the same as if her head were shaved. For if a woman is not covered, let her also be shorn. But if it is shameful for a woman to be shorn or shaved, let her be covered. And it's just talking about it. It's a disgrace in that instance. And it has to do with the fact that the woman's head in the situation is the man. It goes through and talks about, in verse 8, the man is not from woman, but woman from man, nor was man created for the woman, but woman for the man. And then it says, for this reason, woman ought to have authority on her head because of the angels. Okay, and so as you're going through the passage, it's talking about submission all the way through. And so again, when you're looking at this, it's kind of like a veil in that culture, and specifically in the Jewish culture, was almost one and the same as our situation where we wear wedding rings. Originally, wedding rings were something that only women wore. And it wasn't until the 20th century that men started wearing wedding rings. And it looks like what was happening here is some of the women in Corinth were one of two things. They were either going with the whole movement of women not to wear head coverings anymore. And so there was some of that going on in the Roman Empire and in Greece at the time. And so it would be kind of like, back in the 60s, women burning bras type of, I know that's a weird reference, but that was a thing back in the 60s. And so it could have been something along those lines, or it could have been along the lines of women feeling freedom, because now they're everything's changed in the Christian church. In Jewish synagogues, women weren't allowed in the church. They were back in a back room basically, and they could oversee what was going on in the church. Usually it was up in a loft. And they could oversee what was going on in there, but only men were inside the synagogue, and men and boys, and 13 and over, basically. And so women weren't allowed in the services. Well, when the church starts, women are allowed in the services, and so there's a freedom that's there. And so it looks like some of these women may have been taking that freedom a little bit too far and flouting the culture. And so in the culture, what you're going to have for sure is the majority of the Roman Empire is veiling, and they're veiling as an act of modesty and as an act of a recognition that they were taken, that they were a married woman, and classically prostitutes did not go around with veils on. They were advertising the fact that they were available. And so you had that situation going on. And so most of the Roman culture, most of the Greek culture was still doing that. And so these women were flouting the culture at this point. And again, it would be like a lady deciding, and it could have been for all kinds of reasons. When you're back in 1 Corinthians 7, there are women. I was
going to mention that.
Yeah, there are women who are asking if they should get rid of their husbands because their husbands weren't believers. And so there could have been a situation where the women were coming into church and thinking that their relationship with their husband kind of got in the way of their relationship with Jesus, and so they didn't want to have that symbol of authority over their heads at that point. And so,
see, I think that explains a lot of the attitude of sexual relationships, still doing weird things mixed with idol temple worship, this culture they're coming out of, and Paul's trying to correct that attitude. And now when you're talking about the clothing, it fits the attitude of what's going on in the church in Corinth.
Exactly. And so basically what they're doing is flaunting the culture and flaunting the majority of the culture. And it's not like there weren't ladies walking around without veils on, but they were flaunting the majority of the culture, and Paul's telling them to stop it. It's a bad witness. And so again, if a lady, actually, if I saw a lady in my fellowship, I don't know that I would necessarily see this because I'm not usually looking for it. But if I noticed a lady that I knew was married, was coming into church and taking off her wedding ring, I'd be asking her, "What are you doing? Why would you do that?" And then she would give me her reasons, and her reasons would probably, in that instance, be along the same lines as this. And I would say to her, "That's not a really great idea. It's not a good thing to do." And so all through this, it's a picture of glorifying your head. And so the man is supposed to glorify Christ, and the woman is supposed to glorify the man. He goes on in the passage and lets you know that this isn't something that is like intrinsic to the genetics of the situation. He says in verse 11, although you have this whole picture of headship, so Christ is the head of the man is the head of the woman, and so on. He says in verse 11, nevertheless, neither is man independent of woman, nor woman independent of man in the Lord. For as woman came from man, even so man also comes through woman, but all things are from God. Talking about the fact that originally in the creation, the man was created first, the woman came out of the man, and so forth. But every man since that point has come from a woman. And so you see this in the picture of submission everywhere where it's used in the New Testament. So famously in Ephesians chapter 5 in verse 22, it talks about the woman needs to submit to her husband, the wife needs to submit to her husband as to the Lord. But the previous verse talks about submitting one to another in the Lord. And so although there is a headship, although there is an authority structure, there's an equality there at the very same time. And so you have that. This whole thing with the angels.
Yeah, so all that's fairly simple to figure out. But
right.
Why for the angels?
Right. The angels, in Ephesians chapter 3, in verse 10, it talks about the church being kind of a school for the angels. And it says this. I'm going to start in verse 9. It says, and to make all see what is the fellowship of the mystery, which from the beginning of the ages has been hidden in God, who created all things through Jesus Christ, to the intent that now the manifold wisdom of God might be made known by the church to the principalities and powers in the heavenly places, according to the eternal purpose which he accomplished in Christ Jesus our Lord. And then he goes on and begins to speak about other things. And so the church is something that is witnessing to the angels. The principalities and powers in the heavenly places is talking about the angels. And later on in 1 Peter, it talks about the angels' desire to look into the things of salvation. The Jews had traditions that the angels were involved in the worship of the synagogue, that they were there with the believers in the synagogue, and that's obviously true. The Bible talks about the angel of the Lord encamps round about those who fear him, and so we have angels around us at all times, and so angels are under authority to the Father, and also obviously to the Son. And for example, when you look in Isaiah chapter 6 verse 2, it talks about the seraphs or the seraphim. And it talks about the fact that they have multiple sets of wings, and so with one set of wings they cover their feet, and with one set of wings they cover their face. Another set of wings they have over their heads, and it's the idea of humility, covering your feet, cover your face before the Lord. It's an idea of humility. It's the idea of honoring the Father, and so the angels honor the Father. The angels know what headship looks like, and when the church flouts that, whether it's man or woman, because both of them are spoken of in this passage, whether it's man or woman, when the church flouts that, it's a bad witness to the angels. Because again, the manifold wisdom of God is being spoken through the church. It's kind of a wild thing, but we know that we're made out of dirt, and it looks like what God's doing with angels is look at what I can do with dirt. So I believe that that's most likely what's going on. When it says, for this reason, the woman ought to have authority on her head, or a symbol of authority on her head, we don't understand the culture that takes place here because we're not used to this. A veil is a symbol of authority. It's a symbol of submission, but it's also a symbol of authority, and it's the power of the woman. And so one of the things that I tell people when we go to Israel, when you go to Israel, you're going to run into Muslim women, and specifically usually Bedouins, who are completely veiled. They got the whole burqa going on. And so their face is veiled, only their eyes are showing, their head is veiled, and only their eyes are showing. And one of the things that you do not do in that culture is look a veiled woman in the eyes. And if you do, they will start yelling at you. They'll chase you. Yeah. Throw things at you, and it's because you're defiling them. You're dishonoring them is what's happening.
Now, is that woman married or unmarried?
That woman would usually be married.
Yeah, so there's a violation there.
Yeah, so there's a violation there. And in many cultures in the Mideast, you don't lock eyes with even a young woman who's walking down the street. You don't look them in the eyes, and it has to do with this whole thing of honoring a woman. You don't hit a woman. You don't look in her eyes. You don't stare at a veiled woman, and so it's that kind of thing. But again, it would be synonymous with taking off your ring when you went into worship.
All right, so I'm just thinking out loud here. That's going to be some tough dating situations when you can't look them in the eyes. Like, how do they even approach this? I know there's more arranged situations.
Yeah, at that point, you're courting, and so it's a woman that you don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm not even going to go down that road. Coming back. Okay. Verse 10. You mentioned angels, but you mentioned the good angels. Uh-huh. I'm saying I hold this view, but there are some people that go, okay, because the whole Genesis 6 thing,
right,
that we're not talking about the good, we could be talking about the bad angels.
And that's a possibility too. And
what do you think about that one?
Well, Tertullian came up with that, and I don't know. I think it could be. It's a little bit of a stretch, but obviously you have angels in Genesis chapter 6 that left their first estate and cohabited with women and that whole thing, and so he could be talking about that.
And then last thing is that how we're going to be over angels, mm-hmm. and so there's this whole authority structure that they're going to basically be reversed as far as it goes now for power and authority, mm-hmm. and it's kind of a teaching moment of you can see them watching them do this messed up authority and go, yeah,
you're going to be over me.
Exactly, and so it's kind of an order thing.
Yeah.
That it could be alluding to. I know
that's what the Jews say caused the fall of Lucifer.
Right.
Yeah. So, not the veiling thing, but just you're going to put that over me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not going to happen.
Him being the highest creation. Yeah.
All right. Good?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, moving on here. All right, you've been...
Yeah, all that to say, I don't know for sure.
It's a long answer for unknown. Okay. You're going through Israel topically mm-hmm. on Wednesday nights. This is the question. What is your opinion on Israel in the last days timeline? I have more to this. Do you think this is just a war that Jesus said would escalate, but the end is not yet? Or do you think this could be the big one leading to World War III?
Whenever I'm looking at this stuff, I'm looking at Ezekiel 38. And so in Ezekiel chapter 38, you have these nations that come down to fight against Israel. And they're all united in this fight. And effectively, what Ezekiel is describing is World War III. Okay? And so here are the nations. It says in Ezekiel 38:2, Son of man, set your face against Gog and that's a personal name, of the land of Magog, and that is the tribal name, the prince of Rosh, Meshach, and Tubal, and prophesy against him. And when you go through and you look at the etymology of Magog and where these people lived, and the group of people that came from them, these are the Russians. And I've seen people try to naysay that, and it's just not doable. These are the Russians that are being spoken about here. And the tribal name is being used, or the ancestral name is being used, because you can change your geography, but you can't change your ancestors, right? And so, for example, Iran used to be called Persia, and that's what we're going to see in this passage. And so you can change the name, but the people are still there. It's still that same group of people. It talks about Magog being drawn down with a hook in their jaws, and coming with Persia, that's Iran. Ethiopia is what we would call Ethiopia. Libya is what we would call Libya. It's Cush in the old King James are with them. Gomer and all its troops. Gomer is a little bit more vague. It probably has to do with some European nations, Eastern European nations, maybe even the Balkans, possibly Germany. And then the house of Togarmah. Turkey has always been called the house of Togarmah. And so the nations that I'm looking for, when I'm looking for the attack that comes down against Israel, and this is what starts off the tribulation period, I believe, are Persia, Ethiopia, Libya, Turkey, and Russia. And so we've got a situation right now where you've got these alliances between Turkey and Iran and Russia. We know that Iran is backing Hamas and Hezbollah, who are the ones who are attacking Israel right now, and the one Hamas being the one that Israel is specifically going to war with. And so, no, I don't think it's the battle that's going to lead into the tribulation. And obviously, I believe that the rapture is coming before that point. I believe it could turn into that really easily. And so, anytime that I'm seeing this kind of stuff, especially with the threats that are coming from different nations, and Iran specifically, you've got some threats coming from Turkey also, and Russia's getting in on this stuff. When I see that kind of stuff, I start looking up. And so Jesus talked about the fact that there were going to be wars and rumors of wars and this kind of stuff taking place in various places leading up to the end. This is the big one, and this one leads into a situation where Israel is delivered from an overwhelming army that comes down to destroy them, and they're delivered by fire and brimstone coming down on those armies, and also coming down on those armies' homelands. And not only that, but Gentile areas. And so that when you get to chapter 39, there's events that take place there where they're burying bones and stuff, and it looks like it's got to be nuclear, NBC, nuclear, biological, chemical. And it looks to me like it's nuclear, and that's World War III. When you start out the book of Revelation, it starts out with 1/4 of the earth being killed in a war. And I believe that this corresponds to that war. So yeah, it could be leading into that. That's what I think.
Okay, so every year you do a prophecy update. And I leave those thinking, man, how many chess pieces can be moved to checkmate before we get out of here? And every year there's like another 2 or 3 moves that I'm like, how could this get any worse?
Right.
And one of those right now, and you're going to be doing one coming up in a couple months, is that America, the situation that we are now, are the weakest we've ever been. We're inept. We're not inept of leadership, and we're just kind of hanging back. The military guys I talked to said our numbers are so low that if something kicked off, we'd have to have a draft because there's not enough. And it's like you see another piece.
My son has been talking with his friends. He's 24, and most of his friends would not be willing to go to war for this president.
And then you have this other thing with the culture of like, look at the demasculinity of our country, and we're going to go to war. It's like, it's not the old America.
Yeah, it's going to get masculine pretty quick,
or we're all just going to die really quick.
Exactly.
But it's one of those things where that's a nuanced eschatology piece, but it's there. Yeah. And it wasn't there 2 years ago.
Right.
And so, man, it's just like even the details are lining up. It's amazing.
It's one of those things that actually, when you're going through this passage again, there is a group of nations, including Saudi Arabia for sure, that basically launches a diplomatic protest against this warfare, and it looks like there's a reference in there to the merchants of Tarshish and their young lions. And that may be a reference to Britain and Britain's colonies, which United States is one of those. And so, United States is not involved, and so there's got to be something that takes us out of the picture before you get to end times prophecy, because we are clearly not there. There are people who try to fudge things to try to make us be in prophecy, but it's we're notable by our absence in those prophecies.
Sure.
And so, like you said, there are things that are taking us out, and it's getting more and more intense as time goes on. We got literally half and half country, where half the country basically hates the United States and wants to fundamentally change everything, which all that means is go away from the Constitution and have some other form of government.
Yeah.
And that's a hatred of the United States.
Along with too many problems to list.
Right. Yep.
So
financial, moral, there's a reason that Muslims hate us. And most of it has to do with morality. And because what they're seeing is what Hollywood puts out. Right. What they're seeing is what politicians put out. And so they don't know about the great mass of Americans and what standards are. And I'm not even saying that most of America even has those standards anymore. But,
right.
Yeah.
All right. Moving on, another topic, completely different. It says this. All right, we just had a homecoming, or the high school kids did. This is a question. I'm a parent who's struggling on what to do with addressing modesty to my kids. Can you talk about what the Bible says in regards to prom and homecoming events that is part of our culture? I have the opinion that some of these girls dress inappropriately, but I don't want to come across as judgmental or legalistic to them. How do I send off my son or daughter to that environment? And if I do, doesn't that send the message that I'm okay with the short skirts and girls dressing like what were called prostitutes back in my day? We talked about this with the Corinth culture. I'm not sure how to approach this. So what would you say addressing this?
It's getting more and more problematic. The Bible's clear on what's supposed to happen with women in dress. 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 9 says, in like manner also that the women adorn themselves in modest apparel with propriety and moderation, not with braided hair, gold or pearls or costly clothing, but which is proper for women professing godliness with good works. And you see the same thing in 1 Peter. It's the idea of modesty. And so women can take and flaunt their bodies and get all the results that come from that, or women can be modest about it. And it's I don't know, when I look at this stuff, some of the things that I see women wearing, obviously they want me to look in certain areas, and they're doing it on purpose. And so they want me to look there. And then if a guy looks there, then they get all offended that he looked there. It's like, well, don't dress like that, because what it does is it draws the eyes there. I know I'm saying things that are making people mad right now. I really don't care.
So to your point, there's a guy, his name's Jordan Peterson, that came out and he wrote a thing, but he talked about in his lectures that why do women wear red lipstick? And he said because of the color flourishes your lips and it draws your eye, and then the rebuttal is, well, why are you looking at my lips? And he's like, well, because you're wearing red lipstick. So and it's that back and forth.
This is why fire trucks are painted red.
Exactly. And so
so that you see them.
yeah, so there's this thing going on, and like you said, when that happens, then they get mad as if, and there is a Christian morality that goes along with that, but that's a separate point than why are you doing that?
Yeah. And so, it's obvious why ladies do that. It's because they want to be seen, they want to be attractive, and that kind of thing. As if you can't be attractive wearing something modest. And it's just that you're not sexualized, right, basically. And so a lady can, if the barn needs painting, she can paint it. But the whole sexualization of women, it's one of those things that we have in our culture where women become sex objects, and they don't like being objectified, and yet the culture promotes that whole thing. And so, the Bible, again, the Bible is really clear on this. And when I think of it from a man's point of view, ladies, do you like guys in Speedos? It's like I grew up in Southern California, going to the beach, and there are guys who wear regular bathing suits, and then there's the guys who walk out in Speedos. And I don't care if it's a 20-something guy or if it's an old guy with a pot belly. Some dude walking around in a Speedo there's only one reason that he's doing that. And it's ridiculous. And it does, it's not something that my wife would ever allow me to do. And so again, you got to keep that in mind. There's a reason that Speedos used to be what swimmers wore, like back when I was a kid. And there's a reason that swimmers went from from Speedos to what are those?
Like bodysuit.
Yeah, rocket suits. There's a reason that they went from those, and it's because Speedos look so ridiculous. It's just and again, it's that kind of thing. And so again, when I'm looking at this kind of stuff. At some point, you got to pull your kids away from that, because it's not getting better. When I think of homecoming dances and proms and that kind of thing, now there's a whole cultural thing that's going on with this. And so girls generally in the world think of the prom as the night that they're going to have sex with their boyfriend for the first time. And it's become this highly sexualized thing. And then on top of it, you've got the music that's going on. And a lot of times what they're doing is playing hip hop. Hip hop is just totally gross sexually. And I thought the stuff that I was listening to when I was a kid was over the top, and this stuff is just ridiculous. Ladies, talking about all kinds of sexual acts in the music and this kind of thing. You're playing any of that kind of stuff at a prom or at a homecoming dance. It doesn't matter if they're bleeping it. All the kids know what's being said. And so, do I want my girl to go to that? No. I don't want her to go to that. Absolutely not. And so, it's the kind of thing where, when I was a kid and you went to the prom, it was one of those things where it could go there, but it wasn't as highly sexualized as it is now. It just wasn't. It wasn't even close to what kids are dealing with right now. So I could go there and be a Christian and be a light. And so it's almost on the level of, do you want to send your Christian child to an orgy? Is that okay? Do you want to send your Christian child to to a strip club? Is that okay? And that kind of thing. It's getting to that point. And when you're talking about kids that they're just a raging bag of hormones in the first place, and then you put them into that kind of situation, it starts becoming overwhelming. And so our youth group, Matt and Lindsay, do their own homecoming. They do their own prom. And so we have a bunch of kids that go to that as an option to the school, and specifically because they're playing decent music and stuff that's honoring to the Lord, and they're dressing appropriately, guys and girls, and doing that kind of thing, and it's really popular. We have I think it was over 100 kids that went this time to homecoming. And so that, if I were you and I was dealing with this with my kids, I would probably go talk to the youth leader and say, hey, can we do something with this?
Mm-hmm.
Can we do something that's along those lines? That's specifically why my youth leader did this, because kids were they wanted to go to something. And what was being offered was so raunchy that they didn't even want to be there. And so I think it's time to start looking for alternatives. So
I have a 12-year-old, and one of the things that can happen is there's nuance that can be convoluted in this, and so you have parents and kids that'll be like, yeah, what's the big deal? It's just kids being kids. It's the world we live in. We can't shelter them for everything. Mm-hmm. And speaking as a dad, as a former young man, and as a counselor, is that when you attract a fleshy man and then you start dating them and then you end up marrying them, the carnage that happens 5 years down, 10 years down, where you expect him to not be a fleshy man, mm-hmm. ends up just being a wasteland of problems, divorce and sexual morality and affairs. And at that point, if they could rewind and go, oh, maybe that just wasn't so much fun. Maybe mm-hmm. there's spiritual implications into those things that are going to affect my life. Right. And if you can see it in that different light, then you put the verses together and go, oh, maybe it's because God loves us, not because he wants to be a killjoy.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And again, part of the reason that our youth leaders have done this is because the kids don't want to go. They get tired of it. Right. And so you got girls that are twerking and doing all the stuff that goes on there, and it's gross. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't send my daughter into that. If my daughter wanted to go into that, I'd be having to talk with her about why.
Right.
Would you want to be involved with that? So.
Okay. That's what I got next. I have a friend who started coming to church for a short time, seemed to be making progress in spiritual things, then just stopped coming. What approach should I take? Do I leave them alone because I don't want to pressure them into something they don't want to do? Or do I try and ask them why they stopped coming and engage in that area?
What I do in situations like that is I just start praying for them. And I pray that if God wants me to have a conversation with them, that he would set me up. And almost always, that's exactly what happens. Something will come up. I'll be talking with them about something else, and they'll just bring it up, and it makes it a whole lot easier to address that type of situation when it's the person themselves that are bringing up whatever the issues are. If it's your friend, you need to be a friend. And so even if God didn't set me up, I'd still be praying about it. And at some point, I would talk to them and go, hey, you were coming to church. What happened? What's going on? How are you doing? And just be concerned about them, because the whole issue with following the Lord has obviously eternal implications. And so, you don't want to be in a situation where they're standing in the judgment and there you are, and they look over at you and say, and their eyes are screaming, why didn't you tell me? Or why didn't you talk to me? And so I treat it that way. And so I pray about it first, ask God to set me up, and God usually does. And but I know that at some point, I'm going to have a conversation with them. So I just want God to set it up first.
Okay. Does the Bible say anything about working with your spouse in the area of making a living? I'm asking because I have the opportunity to work full-time with my wife, but not sure if that's a good idea or not because of added stress it can bring to the marriage.
Yeah. Don't tempt the Lord.
Have you ever worked with your wife?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So
You know how many times I fired her? It's hard to work with your wife. Depending on the kind of relationship that you have, it can be a really hard thing to work with your wife. Me and my wife, it's like they're. I'm a lot more. What would I say? What can I say that I can't? I'm not going to get myself in trouble with my wife. I'm a lot more easygoing with my authority in the home than I am here. It's like this isn't mine, and so it's going to run a certain way, and what I'm going to be doing is doing my best to run it the way that Jesus would have me run it, and I'm not interested in having a conversation about it. Not one where you're arguing with me, and so. The back and forth between a husband and a wife can be one of those things that can cause real problems in a job situation. But my job is a church, and so let me think about this. Would I want to work with my wife on a construction crew? No, I would not. Because she'd just be carrying studs all the time, because that was my punishment. Go carry those studs over here. The whole idea with it's just a different relationship, and so.
So is that personality wise? You think some people could do it?
Yeah, I think some people absolutely could do it. I can't, and my wife would agree that she can't. And so I have her in a different building.
That's true. I didn't think about it. She's a principal, so yeah, some of this is going on.
Yeah, she's the principal of the school, but it's like she's not here with me all the time. I would never have her be my secretary because I would have to be defining boundaries all the time. In a situation like that, she knows her boundaries over there, and I'm not all the time in the middle of her stuff. And she does a great job. She's really good at what everybody loves her, and so I love her, and as a principal, and so she does a great job. But the back and forth between her and I in the same room or in close proximity all the time would end up causing problems, and so I don't want to do that. I said at the beginning, how many times I've fired my wife, and I've said that to her. How many times have I fired you? And she goes, how many times have I quit? And so that is something that I would if I was looking at doing something with my wife as far as work, all day. Work. That is absolutely something that I would be looking at. My marriage is more important than my work, and so I don't want to do things that are going to cause real problems in my marriage. And again, some couples, I think that absolutely they could work together all the time, but again, that's something that I would be looking at. So
sure, definitely pray about it.
Yep.
All right, guys, we are out of time for today. Thanks for joining us. Hopefully you're blessed. Email us, crosswalkradio@gmail.com with any of your questions. You can text 707-872-7677. Remember doing an Israel study tonight, as Pastor Steve's going over that subject, doing a topical. And then if you want to join us for church sometime, currently we have 3 services Sunday morning, which is 7:30, 9:15, and 11:15. And then we have a Wednesday 6:30, obviously we just talked about, and then a Sunday 6 p.m. as well. So this Sunday night, we're going to be doing a worship night. So Brandon B's going to be leading us in worship, and encourage you guys to come out and spend time with us there. So all I got for you this week. Have a great week. God bless you.